Meanwhile, at the security checkpoint, Patterson was escalating the situation further, seemingly enjoying the power he held over the elderly veteran. "I'm going to need you to step aside," he announced to Colonel James Mitchell, his voice carrying across the terminal. "I'm calling my supervisor to take a look at this fake ID and these supposedly authentic military documents you claim to have." James felt his face burn with embarrassment as hundreds of travelers watched him being singled out and humiliated. Security cameras were recording the interaction. Passengers were openly filming with their phones, and he could imagine the headlines: "Elderly man accused of stolen valor at airport." "Sir," James said, his voice still controlled, despite the storm of emotions inside him, "I understand you're doing your job, but I'm telling you the truth. I served my country for 4 decades, and I earned every medal and commendation I received through blood, sweat and sacrifice in combat zones around the world." Patterson's response was swift and cruel, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never faced real danger or sacrifice. "Save it for someone who believes you, old man. Real veterans don't have to prove themselves by making up elaborate stories about their service. If you were really some kind of war hero, you'd have better documentation than this questionable ID that probably came from some online scam site." When Patterson announced he was calling his supervisor to examine the fake ID, that's when everything changed. 6 men standing in the security line had been watching the entire exchange with growing alarm and anger. They weren't tourists or business travelers, despite their casual clothes and unremarkable appearance. They were Navy SEALs from Team 7, returning home from a classified deployment, and they were about to teach everyone in that terminal what real military brotherhood looked like. The morning had started like any other at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Colonel James Mitchell, 78 years old, moved through the terminal with the measured pace of someone who had learned to live with chronic pain. His polished wooden cane, a necessity since Vietnam shrapnel had finally caught up with his aging joints, clicked rhythmically against the floor. He wore a navy blazer over pressed khaki slacks, looking like any elderly gentleman traveling to visit family. But tucked carefully in his wallet was something most Americans would never see: his Medal of Honor citation, earned when he saved 43 men during one of the most devastating ambushes of the Vietnam War. Today was special for James. He was flying to Norfolk for his great-nephew's Marine Corps commissioning ceremony. It was the first time in a decade he'd felt strong enough for such travel, and he'd been planning this trip for months. His great-nephew, Michael, had called him personally to ask if he could make it. "I want you there more than anyone, Uncle James," the young man had said. "You're the reason I'm joining the Marines. Your service inspired me." James had promised he would be there, no matter what. As James approached the TSA checkpoint at 7 in the morning, he presented his military ID with the same crisp precision he'd learned at basic training nearly 60 years ago. His movements were slower now, arthritis having claimed the fluid grace of his younger years, but the discipline remained. "Good morning," he said to the initial agent, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 25. "I'm traveling on military orders to Norfolk." The agent examined his ID routinely, running it under the scanner. Everything seemed fine until TSA Supervisor Gary Patterson noticed the interaction from his position near the metal detector. Patterson, a heavy-set man in his 50s with 12 years at TSA, had developed what he considered a keen eye for fraudulent documents. He'd caught 3 cases of stolen valor in his career, and he took particular pride in exposing what he saw as disrespect to real veterans. But somewhere along the way, his vigilance had transformed into cynicism, and his caution had become cruelty. "Let me take a look at that ID," Patterson called out loudly, walking over with an exaggerated swagger that immediately drew attention from nearby travelers. He took the ID from the younger agent and examined it with theatrical suspicion, holding it up to the light and squinting at it as if he were some kind of forensic expert. "This looks questionable to me. The photo doesn't really look like you." James stood patiently, his weathered hands resting on his cane. He dealt with skepticism before. His appearance had changed significantly over the decades. The strong-jawed young soldier in the ID photo had given way to an elderly man marked by time and sacrifice. "Sir, I can assure you that identification is genuine. I served my country for 40 years, retiring as a full colonel in the United States Army. Yeah, well, that's exactly what someone with a fake ID would say, Patterson announced, his voice deliberately loud enough for the growing crowd of travelers to hear. Several people had stopped to watch, and James could see phones being pulled out, cameras beginning to record. We see this stolen valor stuff all the time. You old guys always have the same story. Purple Heart, Bronze Star, right? You people think you can just flash some fake military ID and get special treatment. The accusation hit James like a physical blow. In all his years since retirement, no one had ever questioned his service or suggested he was lying about his military career. The public humiliation was devastating, made worse by the dozens of travelers who had now formed a semicircle around the checkpoint, many recording with their phones. He could feel their eyes on him, some sympathetic, others curious, all watching an old man being dressed down in public. As a matter of fact, James said quietly, struggling to maintain his composure despite the mounting humiliation, I do have medals, including one that I'd rather not have earned the way I did. His voice carried the weight of memories he'd spent 50 years trying to process. The screams of wounded men, the smell of burning jungle, the weight of decisions that had saved some lives while losing others. Patterson rolled his eyes theatrically, playing to his growing audience like a performer who'd found his stage. Right. And I suppose you saved your whole unit, too. Let me guess. Vietnam War hero, right? That's the classic stolen valor story. Next, you'll be telling me you have a Medal of Honor or some other made-up decoration. These guys always claim the highest honors, thinking nobody will question them. What Patterson didn't know was that 6 men standing in the security line had been watching the entire exchange with growing alarm and anger. They had just returned from a classified deployment in Eastern Europe, a mission that would never make the news, but had prevented a significant threat to American interests. They were exhausted, eager to get home to their families, but what they were witnessing made their fatigue irrelevant. Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was the first to fully grasp what was happening. At 34, he was the senior enlisted member of the team, with 5 combat deployments and a Silver Star for actions in Afghanistan that remained classified. As a Hispanic American from East Los Angeles, Marcus had experienced his own share of discrimination, and he recognized the look of a man being unfairly targeted. The way Patterson was treating this elderly veteran made his blood boil. You seeing this? Marcus whispered to Chief Petty Officer David Chen, who was standing next to him in line. Chen, a 31-year-old Chinese American from San Francisco, had completed 4 combat deployments and earned his own collection of commendation. He nodded grimly, his jaw tightening as he watched Patterson continue his public humiliation of James. The other 4 members of their team had also turned their attention to the confrontation. Petty Officer First Class Robert Washington, a 29-year-old African-American from Detroit, had already started recording on his phone, recognizing the importance of documenting what was happening. Petty Officer First Class Kevin O'Sullivan from Boston, Petty Officer Second Class Michael Thompson from Montana, and Petty Officer Second Class James Park from Seattle completed the group of elite warriors who were about to intervene. Story rehook. Patterson's voice grew louder, more theatrical. Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside while I verify these obviously fraudulent documents. We take stolen valor very seriously here. He turned to address the crowd, seeming to enjoy his moment of authority. This is what we deal with every day, folks. People trying to take advantage of the respect we have for our real heroes. That's when Rodriguez made his decision. He stepped out of line with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years moving through dangerous spaces. His voice, when he spoke, carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-and-death situations. Excuse me, Rodriguez said, his tone calm but with an edge that made several nearby travelers stop mid-step. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with this gentleman. Patterson looked up from James's ID, annoyed at the interruption and clearly irritated that his show of authority was being questioned. Sir, please return to your place in line. This security matter doesn't concern you, and I need you to mind your own business. Rodriguez smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. It was the kind of smile that warriors wore before demonstrating exactly how wrong someone's assumptions could be. Actually, it concerns me very much. You see, I'm active duty military, and so are my 5 teammates over there. He gestured to the other SEALs, who, as if on cue, stepped out of line with perfect synchronization. They formed a semicircle around the security checkpoint, their movements coordinated with the precision that only comes from years of training together. They didn't make any threatening gestures, but their presence was unmistakable. These weren't ordinary travelers. The way they moved, the way they positioned themselves, everything about them screamed elite military training. Patterson's confidence began to waver as he found himself facing 6 of the most highly trained warriors in the American military. The casual authority he'd been wielding over an elderly man suddenly seemed much less impressive when confronted by men who radiated genuine power and discipline. "Look, I don't know who you think you are," Patterson said, his voice losing its earlier arrogance, "but I'm just doing my job here. This man's ID looks suspicious, and I have every right to question it. I'm Master Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs," Rodriguez interrupted, pulling out his military ID with crisp precision. "These are my teammates. We've just returned from a classified deployment overseas, and we're traveling home to see our families. Just like this gentleman here." He gestured toward James, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. David Chen stepped forward, his own military ID in hand. "Chief Petty Officer David Chen, I'd like to examine this gentleman's ID that you claim is fake. I've been through military security checkpoints hundreds of times, and I know exactly what authentic documentation looks like." Patterson found himself surrounded, not physically threatened, but completely outmaneuvered. The crowd of travelers had grown larger, and the atmosphere had shifted from casual curiosity to electric tension. Everyone could sense that something significant was happening. "Now wait just a minute," Patterson started to protest, but Rodriguez cut him off. "No, you wait," Rodriguez said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more intimidating than any shout. "This man told you he served his country. He told you he earned his medals through service and sacrifice. And instead of thanking him for that sacrifice, you accused him of stolen valor in front of hundreds of people." Robert Washington stepped forward, his phone held conspicuously in his hand, still recording. "What's your name, sir? I want to make sure I spell it correctly when I post this video online. The world needs to see how TSA treats elderly veterans." Patterson's face went pale as he realized the implications. "You can't record me without my permission. This is a federal facility, actually." "I can," Washington replied calmly. "This is a public area. You're a public employee performing your duties, and you're publicly humiliating a veteran. The First Amendment protects my right to document this interaction. I learned about constitutional rights during my service to this country. Did you?" By now, the confrontation had drawn an even larger crowd. Other travelers were gathering around the security checkpoint, many of them recording with their own phones. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted from routine morning travel to something charged with moral outrage. Kevin O'Sullivan turned to James, his expression softening with the respect one warrior shows another. "Sir, what's your name and unit? We'd like to know who we're standing with." "Colonel James Mitchell, retired," James replied, his voice stronger now that he had allies. "First Infantry Division in Vietnam, later commanded various units during my 40-year career." "When were you in Vietnam, sir?" O'Sullivan asked respectfully. 3 tours between 1968 and 1974, James replied. "Lost a lot of good men over there, but we did our job and brought as many home as we could." Rodriguez nodded, recognizing the quiet way James described his service. Real veterans didn't brag or embellish. They simply stated facts and let others draw conclusions. "What decorations did you earn during your service, Colonel?" James hesitated, not from uncertainty but from a lifetime of avoiding this particular conversation. He'd learned that talking about his highest decoration often made people uncomfortable or skeptical. But these men were military. They would understand. "I was awarded the Medal of Honor," James said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the ambient noise of the terminal. for actions during an ambush near the Cambodian border in 1972. The words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. Murmurs rippled through the gathered travelers. Even the TSA agents who had been processing other passengers stopped to listen. The Medal of Honor was America's highest military decoration, awarded for valor above and beyond the call of duty. Fewer than 3,500 people had received it since the Civil War. Rodriguez's expression shifted to one of profound respect. In 14 years of military service, he had never met a Medal of Honor recipient in person. "Sir, would you be willing to show us your citation? I think everyone here needs to understand exactly what kind of man they're witnessing." James nodded slowly and reached into his wallet, retrieving a folded document he had carried for over 50 years. His hands, weathered by age but still steady, unfolded it carefully. The paper was worn from decades of handling, but the words remained clear. Rodriguez took the citation with the reverence normally reserved for sacred documents. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud, his voice carrying across the now completely silent terminal. "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as a company commander with the 1st Infantry Division during combat operations against an armed enemy in the Republic of Vietnam. When his company was ambushed by a superior enemy force, Captain Mitchell repeatedly exposed himself to intense hostile fire to direct the evacuation of wounded soldiers and coordinate defensive positions. Despite being wounded himself, he single-handedly destroyed 3 enemy machine gun positions and led a counterattack that saved the lives of 43 American soldiers. His extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army." The terminal remained completely silent as Rodriguez finished reading. The weight of James's actions settled over everyone present. Patterson stood motionless, his face drained of color, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. He had just accused a Medal of Honor recipient of stolen valor in front of hundreds of witnesses and multiple recording devices. James Park pulled out his phone and quickly searched military databases. "Colonel James Mitchell, Medal of Honor recipient, Vietnam War," he announced, turning his phone screen toward the crowd. 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, Purple Heart with oak leaf clusters, and dozens of other decorations spanning a 40-year career. "This man is a legitimate American hero." Patterson was completely trapped. He was surrounded by 6 Navy SEALs, facing a crowd of increasingly angry travelers, and dealing with a veteran whose heroic service record was being verified in real time. Washington addressed Patterson directly. "Sir, I need to ask you something. If this gentleman had been younger, would you have questioned his ID with the same level of suspicion and public humiliation?" Patterson's face flushed red. This isn't about age discrimination, isn't it?" Washington pressed. "Because I've been through this checkpoint dozens of times, and I've never seen you question a younger veteran's ID like this. But here's an elderly hero, and suddenly you're an expert on fake military identification." The accusation hung in the air. Everyone could see exactly what had happened. An elderly veteran had been discriminated against by a security guard who had made assumptions based on age and appearance rather than facts. Final rehook. Chen stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Chinese American. I've been a SEAL for 9 years, and I've faced my share of skepticism. But what you've done to Colonel Mitchell today is beyond unacceptable. You've dishonored a man who sacrificed everything for this country." The crowd began to voice their support. Someone started clapping, and soon the entire terminal erupted in applause for James. People were calling out thanks for his service, and several veterans in the crowd stepped forward to shake his hand. Rodriguez turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel James Mitchell. He saved 43 American lives and earned our nation's highest decoration. He should never have to prove that to anyone, especially not to someone who has never served." Michael Thompson stepped forward with his phone. "Colonel Mitchell, would you honor us with a photo? We'd like to show the world what real military brotherhood looks like." James nodded, tears welling in his eyes for the first time in decades. The 6 SEALs arranged themselves around him, and several passengers volunteered to take pictures. The images would later go viral, showing 6 of America's elite warriors standing with an elderly hero, demonstrating that military service transcends generations. Patterson, realizing his career was over, quietly mumbled an apology. But the damage was done. Within hours, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. Within a week, it would reach 15 million views, sparking nationwide conversations about veteran treatment. Rodriguez handed James his business card. "Colonel, you have family in the Special Operations community. We take care of our own, and that includes all veterans who served with honor." The other SEALs followed suit, each offering their contact information and making it clear that James had their support. They helped him through security with full military honors, ensuring he had everything he needed for his flight. As James walked toward his gate, escorted by 6 Navy SEALs, the entire terminal watched in respectful silence. Patterson was suspended immediately and would later be terminated. The TSA would implement new training programs specifically addressing the treatment of elderly veterans. James made his flight to Norfolk, where hundreds of supporters who had seen the video greeted him at the airport. His great-nephew's commissioning ceremony became even more meaningful, with Michael introducing his uncle as the reason I chose to serve. The 6 SEALs stayed in touch with James, adding him to their brotherhood. They had reminded the world that military service transcends rank, branch, and generation. Rodriguez would later say in an interview, "We didn't just stand up for Colonel Mitchell that day, we stood up for every veteran who has ever been disrespected or doubted." Months later, James would speak at military events, sharing not just his combat experiences, but the story of 6 young warriors who had restored his faith in military brotherhood. "They showed me that the values we fought for still matter," he would say. "That respect, honor, and loyalty didn't die with my generation." The incident at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport lasted less than 30 minutes, but its impact would be felt for years. It became a reminder that heroes come in all ages, that service should be honored regardless of when it was given, and that sometimes it takes warriors to defend warriors. Patterson would later issue a public apology, admitting that his cynicism had clouded his judgment and that he had failed in his duty to treat all people with respect. But for many, it was too little, too late. The video served as a powerful lesson about assumptions, discrimination, and the importance of standing up for what's right. It showed that in a world often divided, there are still moments when people unite around fundamental values of respect and honor. James Mitchell had saved 43 lives on a battlefield in Vietnam 50 years earlier. But on that day at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, 6 Navy SEALs saved something equally important: his dignity, his honor, and his faith in the brotherhood of those who serve. The airport eventually returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson echoed through the military community and beyond. 6 Navy SEALs had shown what brotherhood really meant, reminding everyone that heroes deserve respect, no matter their age. If this story moved you, remember to honor the veterans in your community. Subscribe for more stories of courage and respect, and share this reminder that real heroes come in all ages and deserve recognition for their sacrifice. Because when good people witness injustice, they have a responsibility to act. And sometimes, that action can change everything.